To start recording. Okay, so my name is Julie Elliott. I'm the Associate Director for Internships in the Career Education Office, and I'm so excited to see all of you here. I laugh that I love being with my family all day, but I also really love seeing new faces and our students and all that. So I thank you for being here. And for those of you interested or willing to turn on your mics or your videos, I love that too. No pressure though. So today, this is part of the 2020 Vision series. We're going to talk about interviewing. I am going to try to keep it to 30 minutes because that's all the time we asked of you. That said, I'm also happy to stay on the call a little bit longer so we can get into questions a little bit later. I'm also happy to have you interrupt me with questions. I think today I'm just going to kind of get through a bunch of stuff, but feel free to interrupt. You can, I will try to watch the chat, but you're also welcome to unmute yourself and jump in there with a question. I actually learned a new a tip a couple weeks ago. If you're on mute, you can actually just hold down the space bar and that lets you temporarily unmute to actually, easily get out there. So, all right, with that being said, thank you for those comments in the chat. I love that. Okay, so I need to move this. Hold on. All right, so let's get in and we're just gonna go through all the different parts of the interview. So let's just jump in. So we're going to talk about the purpose of the interview, some different types of interview styles, some specific questions on how to work through those, and then a little bit of kind of like the before, during, and the after of an interview. So with that, let's get to the purpose of the interview, which is really about fit. As I wrote in the daily email today, like the first thing you should do when you get an interview is pat yourself on the back, right? Because that means that you communicated clearly your skills, talents, and abilities and match those to what the job is looking for. And so really the interviewers, they want to hear more, right? They want to see if you're going to be somebody they want to work with, well, remotely now. But if I think about it, I spend more time with my work colleagues when I'm in Van Meter than I do with my family, right? So they want to make sure it's a good fit. So the organization or the interviewers are seeing that fit and how you can do the job and then fit with the organization. But I also want to make it clear that it's your opportunity to see if it's a good fit for you, right? To make sure the position fits for you, to make sure that the environment, that the supervisor, interviews really are a two-way conversation. And I think sometimes students are or job seekers, I should say, are so excited to get the interview they forget a little bit about the other side of that. So you want to make sure it's a good fit for you. You want to be able to communicate your skills and talents and all of that good stuff. Well, what has happened? There we go. So let's dig into a couple of different types of interviews. So these days, it's probably only those first two, but so phone interviews are just like they sound, like you will get, schedule a phone conversation. Skype or Zoom could be live in-person interviews. Face-to-face, so that could be when you actually go into an office, which I don't think is happening much anymore, or not at all probably. But the site interviews or interviews can range from, we wrote an hour here, but actually it can just be even a 30-minute conversation. It could be a half day, a full day. I know for some positions like the provost or, upper level, the management positions, it could be multiple days. The panel interview or a group interview, so it could be you as one person with a group of people interviewing you. So if anyone is interviewed for a position in the CEO, like they get all of us in one room and asking them questions. Or it could be the opposite. You could be part of a group interview. So something like Teach for America, they often bring several candidates in and they discuss articles. So it could be, seeing how you work with different groups of people. The web recorded interview is actually something we're seeing a lot more of, where you actually get invited to record yourself answering some questions. There's been a lot of conversation about this. I've been trying to, like right before the pandemic hit, I was doing a lot of research about how companies are using artificial intelligence to review these web recorded interviews. So that's something we're seeing most often. I'd love to see just even a quick nod. Has anyone had one of those types of interviews? I see a nod. Okay. So that's just a very different thing, right? Because you're not talking to a live person. You're actually, in a Zoom-like situation, but there's no one on the other end. And then sometimes there could be a performance component. Again, when people interview for the CEO, for our career community advisor positions or other positions, we ask them to do a presentation. I know Teach for America, as another example, they actually have their candidates teach a 5-minute lesson. So there could be lots of different parts of an interview, but these sort of are really quickly some of the most common. Let's dig into some of the different types of questions. So there are these so there's general, behavioral, and situational or scenarios. So these general questions are some examples here, right? What are your strengths and weaknesses? Why do you want this position? I one time was working at another school that had interview rooms. So for recruiters that actually came on campus, and I was walking by one of the rooms, and I heard someone say, well, what do you know about our company and how did you learn that? So they could be these real, just general questions, excuse me. A common one at the end is, why should we hire you? And that's just a chance to kind of recap, not kind of, but to recap your skills, talents, the match to the position. I feel like I've said that probably 13 times already, but that's key when you are interviewing as well as when you apply, right? You want to make sure that you're connecting your skills and strengths to what the job is asking for. One of the most well-used questions, and is a typical starting question, is tell me about yourself. Has anyone had that question in the interview? I see some more head nods. So let's talk about that one really quickly, because I think you are going to get that. It's fairly common. Even though it is this really open-ended question, I want you to be intentional about how you answer that. So to think about adding the next part to that question of, tell me about yourself as it relates to why you're in this room right now. I did a mock interview for a student, gosh, probably 15 years ago. And I asked this question in an interview, and she told me about, she was the oldest of 11 kids and how she had to manage all their school schedules and all that stuff. And as a person, I was very interested, because who has 11 children anymore? But after we got out, after we finished the mock interview, I was asking her about that. And we were doing a mock interview to prepare for a PhD program in literature. And after we talked about it, she started to say, because she was the oldest of all these children, she actually read these fairy tales repeatedly to her siblings, like with each one, and how that really matched her interest in wanting to work, study fairy tales. Unfortunately, she missed that piece of it, right? She just told me about her family and having to keep track of all these kids. So add that part of the question, right? Tell me about yourself and how it impacts why you're sitting in this room today or on the Zoom call. Okay. I think I think it is common enough that I want you to really think about this one. And I would even say rehearse it a little bit, but I don't want you to rehearse to the point of it sounding rote or super memorized. But think about what's unique about you. It could be a study abroad experience, an internship you've been involved in. It doesn't need to be this biography statement, but again, it's that connection to the job or the employer, that sort of thing. Okay. I'm going to move on to behavioral-based questions. So these are, I think, also a fairly common type of interview question. And it really is looking at a past behavior as a predictor of future behavior. So some of these examples, right? Give me an example of time you've worked as part of a team. Tell me about a time you failed. When have you had to, describe a time, give me an example, those kinds of questions are tipping you off that this is a behavioral-based interview. What that again is asking is for a past behavior, past action. So to have some of those stories at the ready, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But you want to think about the structure to that answer. One time I was doing a mock for someone applying to be a resident advisor, and I asked about a conflict. It was clearly raw because the student went on and on and on about her roommate did this, and then she did this, and give me so much of the detail, but missed the opportunity to tell me what the specific student did or how they were involved. So I want you to keep STAR in mind. And this was one of the articles that were linked in the message today. But STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So whenever you are having one of these behavioral-based questions, I want you to think of STAR as you answer. So to me, the situation and the task are the details. right? Give them enough information. What's the scenario? What's happening in the situation? What is sort of the crux of the issue or the goal, or, you know, it's the details. I'm using my hand. I'm such a hand talker. I'm using my hands because I'm going to say, if this is how much you talk about the situation and task, and you need to talk at least this much, if not more, about the action and result, right? Because that's where you're connecting what your skills are to, and showing how that past behavior is how you'll do that work in the organization. So you want to focus. Sometimes it's real easy to get stuck or focused on the situation and task because that's details, right? Oh, you know, last semester I had 3 projects and a presentation. You know, it's easy to get stuck in the details, but I really want you to focus again, if not longer. What did you do? What actions did you take? What skills did you use? What were the results? What, you know, how did you impact the outcome of the situation? Another thing you can add is also, what did you learn from that experience, or what would you have done differently? Some of those more negative, like the one that says, you know, describe a time you were in a stressful situation or a time you failed. It's not so much that happened. You know, we're all human. Of course, we've all had missteps and failures, but what the employer wants to know is how you've learned from that, how you've moved forward. So you can always add that to the results piece, is what did you learn? What would you do differently? Even in a great example, right? Maybe you have an example of how you were part of a team, but as you're reflecting and thinking about it, you say, oh, well, next time I'm going to make sure I do this, or this might have added to that, just to be able to show an employer that you're constantly thinking and growing. Okay. So another type of interview question is situational or scenario. I know that, you know, sometimes in finance, sometimes in consulting, they will actually give you case studies. They will give you, consulting likes to throw these kind of hairball questions of like, how many golf balls fit into an elevator or something like that. Right, there's probably really no right answer, but they want to see how you frame it around an experience you have or what information you do know, and wanting to look at how you handle those questions, and the skills you use to resolve them. So sometimes when I do a mock interview, I'm going to throw in a kind of random question. And again, it's not so much the answer, it's also how you handle that. Okay. I'm going to stop there and just see if anyone has any questions about the types of interviews or some of the questions that you might be asked. I'm going to just look at the chat to see if there's anything in there.
I have a question.
Yeah, jump in there.
So just so we can understand it, like from the employer's point of view,
yeah,
what is their kind of like biggest motivation for asking the behavioral type questions?
It could be based on things they know that happen in the workplace, right? So framing it around career services, because that's the industry I obviously know the most. You know, sometimes we have students that we work with that we give some action items, or the student identifies some action items and then they don't do those, right? So it could be a question that we would ask is, how would you handle that situation? Because we know that it happens. It could also be looking at a specific skill set. And that's where the job description comes in, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But it could be like, if they know that they use Excel a ton, right? They might ask you a situation, I'm telling them how you use Excel. So it could be, the motivation could be based on the work, or a specific skill set that they need. And so I've already alluded to it, but one of the ways to prepare is really to dig into that job description. Thanks for the question. Anything else before I move on? I see my chat is... so a question is, how can you tell the difference between saying too much, giving too much detail, and saying too little? Oh, that is a great question, Dana. I think you want to watch your interviewer to the extent that you can. Obviously, in those recorded videos, there's not a person, but you do usually have a time frame, a time limit. It could be 3 minutes, 4 minutes, that kind of thing. I also think there's a part of interviewing that you want to try to be thinking and to Ruth's question, like, why is the person asking this? And to make sure that you are giving them enough information that they understand it. Like, I've been in interviews, you know, we've had so many open positions recently, and sometimes listening to them, I'm like, you are just rambling on and on. So you want to try, there's no way you're going to know every question you're going to be asked, and there's no way you're going to know really why are they asking this question. but you want to try to identify quickly what it is that they're looking for and how you can show that. So back to the behavioral-based question, I think anytime that you can frame an answer around a specific experience, I think that is really great. The STAR strategy, the structure, if you will, I think gives that focus to the answer so that you know, like, you've got to hit each of those points. But it is, you want to be concise. You want to watch the nonverbals of the person you're talking to. And I guess just give it your best shot. Give it your best shot. I don't know what the magic time frame is. Like, I can't say to everyone, you only have 2 minutes to answer a question. But you do want to make sure that you're being specific, that you're being clear and concise to the extent that you can. Great question, though. Anything else before I move on? Okay, so I'm going to move on. So let's talk a little bit about sort of the before, the during, and the after. So the before the interview, that's really where you're going to spend the majority of your time if you think about those 3 pieces. You really want to research the position and the organization. And so to me, that's the website, but then that's also Googling them, right? If you're looking at Hulu, which is the example I used a ton yesterday, look on their website, see what is if you get a sense of what their culture is, who their products are, who their clients are, all of that stuff. Because you do want to ask questions in the interview, but you do not want to ask questions that you can easily find the answer to online. And I would encourage you, before the day, you should be doing obviously this prep and research before the interview, but the day of, you need to do that Google search again. Because what if you are interviewing with Hulu and, tomorrow they lay off, unfortunately, X number of people, right? Or maybe they just launched a new product, or they launch, so you want to make sure you're doing, plenty of research beforehand, but then also right before. The day of, I should say. Glassdoor is a resource. I don't know if anyone has used that, but you can actually get a list of it's oh gosh, I just blanked on the word. It's user edited, so people can add information about their interviews, like what were some of the questions, what was the interview like. You can get a sense of what salaries might be. So it's a great tool. If anyone schedules a mock interview with me, I ask what it's for. And if I get a name of a specific company or a type of position, I'm going to go look in Glassdoor to try to get some questions that, align with that field. And then I think to tap into your network, right? Do you know anybody that works at the organization that has experience with the organization? So we talked a lot yesterday about LinkedIn and tapping into that community of support. I think, and I said it yesterday a couple of different times, I think to tap into that community before you even apply. But even if you haven't, certainly before the interview, if time allows. Right now, if you apply for something and you're lucky enough to get an email that day inviting you tomorrow, that could be a little harder. But to the extent that you can, try to tap into people that work or have some affiliation with that organization, just to get some insight. The other thing I've mentioned before too is you really need to dig into that position description. Right. Hopefully you've done this at the interviews, the application stage, right? But really pick apart that job description, right? What are the skills? What are the tasks? And then come up with some stories, right? Be ready with some stories. So we talked about behavioral-based interview, which really is like, give me a story, they're saying. But I think if you have some of those stories like in your toolbox, like you can use those in lots of different ways. So I'm going to show you, the next slide will give you a little bit of information on that. The other thing I want you to do is to write down some questions. What's great, like I'm doing this on Zoom and I have my my computer lifted up a little bit while I have some notes right in front of me, which is why I always actually really liked phone interviews, because you could have notes out, where you can in person. So write them down, right? So that you have some questions. Questions I always like to ask are, who's my supervisor and what their style is like. Could you, if particularly now, since you probably can't go to the site, ask if they can give you a sense of what the culture of the organization is, or, based on some information you read on their website. One of my first jobs, my first job out of graduate school, I had researched the organization just a ton, the school a ton. And when I went to the interview, I actually had probably 15 questions typed. And at one point, the the director of the Career Center there was like, gosh, you know more about our webpage than we do, you know? So really dig down. Again, it shouldn't be a question that you can easily get the answer to, but maybe you read something on their website and you want to know more, right? Then you can get a chance to show you've actually done your research. So really dig into the company, the position, and then identify some questions that you want to ask. So here's a strategy that I like to encourage students to do. So it's just making this sort of simple grid, right? And then to look at the job description and pull out some of those skills, or it could be some tasks, right? Some of the responsibilities. Then I want you to just quickly think of what are some specific examples, right? And I think this prep is going to just get you in the right frame of mind. Like I said before, there is no way you're going to know every question you might be asked. But by spending some time really digging in and thinking about what the job description is asking for, we'll just have you ready with some of those examples. So I like to throw in both a positive and a negative, because really the negative gives you a chance, like we said before, about how you improve or what you learn from the situation. So I think just to make this kind of grid, you know, and however many, you know, tasks or skills you want to pull from the job description, just so you have some, you know, we call it the toolbox, right? Just have some stories ready in the toolbox. But really, again, the focus is like use that job description to help you with this strategy. So also before the interview, again, I think because all of them, at least in the foreseeable future, is going to be Zoom, or it could be one of these web recorded, just, you know, right, be the director of your own video, right? Make sure the background is good, the lighting, all that stuff, test your equipment, make sure you're in a distraction-free zone, which I know is hard. I actually have a little sign on my bedroom door right now that says presentation, do not disturb. And then this is what I really struggle with. I can obviously see myself in the image. So I'm trying not to look at that. I'm really trying to look at my at the camera, but it can be a little bit hard sometimes. So here's some, you know, also before the interview that is actually from our the presentation we've had for a while. So to get the interview details, right? So once you are you know, offer the interview, find out as much as you can, right? Can they tell you, you know, about the interview, how many people you might be interviewing with, you know, you know, what's the actual schedule? Like if you know that you're going to be on Zoom, that you can actually, you know, figure out who you're meeting with, if there's going to be multiple people there. You know, if you're on Zoom for 2 hours, that's clearly not going to be one person, right? So just to get a sense of that. If you were going in person, right, just to make sure you understand the travel and parking situation. Again, this creating a portfolio, that's if you were going in person, because hopefully sometime in the future, we'll be back in person. But I always encourage students to bring copies of your resume, because I've been in interviews where we go to start the interview and the interview is like, oh, wait, what did I do with your resume? And I can be like, oh, here you go, you know? So to be ready for that, I think to have examples of your work or a reference list, often, I won't say often, but sometimes during actual interviews, if the interview is going really well, and they'll say, oh, do you have a list of references for us? That's a little bit of a key that they at least enjoy the conversation enough to want to talk to other people. So once you start interviewing, I would certainly encourage you to have a list of references. 3 is sort of typical, and be sure to ask them before you put them on a list. I am happy to be references for any of our student assistants that I work with. But I will tell you one story. After I had my second child, I get this reference call from a student that I had worked with a couple years before, and they start asking me questions, and I was still in mommy brain fog, and I just couldn't remember how long I had known the student. Like, it was not good. So help the person help you, right? Like ask them. Usually what I do when I'm a reference is I ask for an updated copy of a resume. So just be sure to do all that prep work before you go on an interview. I will say too, before the interview, like practice, right? Even if it's just you talking out loud in your bathroom. I actually had a presentation earlier this morning with some faculty, and I was doing that very same thing, and my 14-year-old was like, what are you doing? But it didn't matter. I just needed to hear what was in my head, right? So it's perfectly fine to practice. I will say too that we also do mock interviews, so I can play, the mean, nasty recruiter and ask you some questions and try to simulate an interview experience. And then clearly, plan what you're going to wear. I'm sure we've all seen that. What was it? CNN, some news clip of a guy who had a suit on, but the image was far enough away you could actually see he still had shorts on. So just, I think too, to get yourself in that mindset, right? My kids are living in sweatpants, but I every day want to put, real clothes with buttons on, just because it gets me in, like, I'm in work mode now. So really to think through that, what you're going to wear. Okay, I have really blown through my time because it's right now 2:30. So if anyone has to go, please feel free. I will not be offended if you leave. But so I'm going to try to talk quicker now. So during the interview, to me, it starts as soon as you turn the computer on or as soon as you get there, right? I think to get there a few minutes early, make sure you turn off the phones. Again, try to have a distraction-free location. But when I mean as soon as you turn on the computer, because say a support staff welcomes you into the room and then connects you to the interviewer, like that support staff or that admin assistant is still part of the process, right? So everybody you meet throughout the interview process, you want to be professional, polite, and caring. I have found with Zoom things, I am trying to be super animated. I try really hard to smile. I mean, I think I smile anyway when I talk to students, but I mean, you really want to have that enthusiasm show up. That's where the eye contact came in. And thanks, Jenna, for the tip on how I can actually turn my video off. I saw that in the chat. So you want to make eye contact, you want to smile. I realize I'm a hand talker. So actually, if I was in an interview, I would probably have something that I could hold on to so that I wouldn't talk as much with my hands. So I just encourage you to make sure that you are communicating not only in your words, but in your mannerisms, how interested you are. Okay, I see some that people just joined us, so awesome. Thank you for coming. If anyone has any questions, pop them into the chat or just unmute yourself and jump in. So after the interview, I think it's really important to, as soon as you turn off the computer, make sure the computer's off and the Zoom is closed or whatever it is, take a minute to just catch your breath. But I want you to process a little bit afterwards. I want you to think about what did you think you answered really well and give yourself a big old pat on the back. And then I want you to think, oh, what could I have done differently? Or what did I maybe not answer as well as I would have liked or as articulately as I would have liked? Because certainly, I've done it a couple times today, right? Like just to, have a misspeak or misstep. So just to reflect a little bit. Because my hope is you do one interview and you get a job, and that's awesome. But throughout the course of your career, right, you're going to have more interviews. So just to learn and reflect and grow from those. I cannot stress enough, I'm going to get on my soapbox just a little bit, but the importance of a thank you note. I think in this day and age, whatever that you can do, the little bit extra is going to be crucial. So I think this is a no-brainer. Like within 24 hours, you need to email a thank you note. Send it to everyone that you interview with, right? So if you are, like say you have a 2-hour Zoom interview and you have, you're meeting with the director and you're meeting with the career counselor and you're meeting, whoever. What's great about Zoom is you can be taking notes, right? Get the names of the spelling correctly, get email addresses, all of those things. And in that thank you note, you want to be sure that you're reiterating your interest. You want to identify skills, like remind them of what some of those skills were that you talked about. Anything that you can include that personalizes that message or connects it to the actual interview. Maybe when you first get on the call, you have this conversation about shows you've been watching while we're all safer at home, or something like that. Like just make some of those notes to think about how to connect with the interviewer and remind them of who you are. The other thing that I will say is really great about these thank you notes is it allows you a chance to, I don't want to say fix, but add additional details. When I was director of a career center in California, we were interviewing people, and I had a candidate that applied for the position and in interviewing for the position, I thought answered a question about working with alums actually really well. But when we got the thank you note, the person added a whole paragraph that's just talked about additional ideas. And so what that said for me as the interviewer is that I just had a real good sense of what the person was still thinking about it and still considering and offering new ideas. So there's a way that you can actually add these, additional information. So you could also send a snail mail, right? I think there's something unique. I go to the mailbox every day to see if I get something. And then you want to make sure to follow up as needed. So when you actually have an interview, one of the last questions that I encourage you to ask is, what's the next step in the process? So after you ask all your other questions, let that be a question so that you know they're making a decision tomorrow, right? Or maybe they say, you're the first candidate, we have 2 more weeks of interviews, or whatever it is. So just by asking that question, you will know kind of where they are in the process. And so that way you can follow up as needed. If they say you're the first candidate, we have 2 more weeks of interviews, then put a note in your phone, and in 2 weeks, send another message, okay? I just saw a new question come in. So if a potential employer asks about your future career goals, what advice do you have about how much we should disclose? Is there some way to sound super motivated, capable, without sounding like this is a stepping stone job? Excellent question. I think particularly in this day and age, like, who knows where paths might take people. I think that students are also going to, and graduates are going to have to be flexible to realize, yeah, that maybe this first job out of college is going to be a stepping stone job. So I think you want to be genuine. Like, I don't want you to say, oh, I intend to be at this company for 10 years, if that's not true. But to give them a sense of what your goals are, whether it's industry based or, what you hope to do in this position, how that will connect with that. So I don't know. I mean, I haven't interviewed in a while, knock on wood. I don't know how often that's getting asked. So I'm guessing the student who asked the question has been asked that recently. But I think you want to be genuine. I don't know that you need to put all your cards on the table to say, oh, I want your job in 2 years. But just to give them a sense that you have given some thought to it, right? If I were to ask someone that question, what do you see as like your career goals or career steps? If someone is like, oh, I don't know, I just want to do this and try it out. That doesn't come across as a motivated student, right? Or a motivated employee. So give them a couple of ideas. Nothing is set in stone. No one's going to record you and say, wait, you said you were going to do this. So I think there is a lot of flexibility these days, right? Because it's hard to know where it lies and where the loyalty lies in terms of companies too. I mean, with the way layoffs are happening, I don't think anyone is expecting that you're going to be in this position for X number of years. And I will say, I don't know the statistic off the top of my head, so please do not quote me, but I think it's like 60% of new college graduates don't only stay in their first job for a year. Don't quote me, but it's something like, it's a very high percentage, in 1 to 2 years. So I think to give it some thought, to be able to articulate what some broad career goals are, but you don't have to lay all your cards on the table of, I'm only going to be here 6 months until I find something else. Because from the employer's perspective, it does take time, energy, and effort and money to get someone trained. Okay. All right, great questions. So some final thoughts. We already talked about this a little bit, right? The nonverbals to look at the camera, which I'm really trying to do. Jen, I'm gonna figure out how to turn so I can't see myself as soon as we're done with this. If we were in person, I don't know that handshakes are gonna come back into the business world anytime soon. But really, again, that nonverbal, the smiling, your posture. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm actually trying to sit up really straight, right? I'm not slouched in my chair. So things like that. I want to, we've talked about that there's no way you're going to know every question you're going to be asked. And sometimes, even when I'm doing mock interviews, I'm thinking on the fly, and what comes out of my mouth is a completely incoherent question. So if you legit either don't hear, like there's some technical issue or the call drops or whatever it is, if you legit can't hear or you just don't understand the question, it is perfectly fine to ask for clarification. It is also perfectly fine to take some time before answering. You know, I've been in interviews where I'm asked a question and my mind goes completely blank. Like it just happens, right? So you can repeat the question. You can ask them to repeat the question. You could just take a moment, take a pause and just answer, think about it. I know, because I've done enough mock interviews, I can see someone stopping and thinking. And I think for the person, it feels like minutes, but really for the interviewer, it probably is only a few seconds. So take the time that you need. We already talked about this with the question that was asked, but you just want to be aware of how long you're talking and really to try to, hone in to try to identify what they're asking and how you can show that you can do that. And we've already talked a little bit about practice interviews and mock interviews and all that good stuff. So, whoops, I went the wrong way. So I went over, I'm sorry. Does anyone have any last minute questions, comments? I'm going to look through the chats just to make sure. Thank you for all the feedback about our series, the sessions or the emails, that kind of thing. I appreciate all of that. I'm just looking to make sure I didn't. Okay, so I think I've gotten all the questions that were there. I just wanted to reiterate that we are open and available for our graduates now, right? 2020 grads, this summer. So we're open all summer while working remotely, as is everyone else in the world. So we are certainly available for individual appointments. We've also heard some very positive feedback about this series. So we might try to do something similar at various points over the summer. So I will say we unfortunately lost our alumni focused career counselor in the ASR in the fall. So at this point, I can say our team is absolutely committed to working with 2020 grads through the summer. And I think we'll just have to evaluate what happens in the fall, how long we can extend the individual service. But certainly all of our resources online. I think we have talked about putting, all of these sessions have been recorded. So I think we're going to record them and share PowerPoints, I think with another, and the daily emails again with students in the coming weeks. So hopefully we'll get that together so you can still access this at a point that you need it. So, well, thank you so much for your time. I'm sorry that I went over. I think I always talk too long, and I like to share stories because I think that just illustrates some points, but maybe that made it take too long. So thank you so much for coming. I'm happy to stick on the call for another minute. Thank you for the claps. I love that. I'm happy to sit on the call for a minute if anyone has any other questions that I can answer. But thank you so much. Tomorrow, well, I should say at 3 o'clock today, what time is it? 2:40. So in 20 minutes on our Instagram Live, we have an alum who works at CNN, who is going to do a conversation about his career path, the industry, and CNN has a rotational program. I'm sorry, I should have reminded myself. But Tashi McQueen, one of our student assistants, is actually going to facilitate that conversation. So if you had a few more minutes at 3 o'clock, that'll be on, it's the Goucher Hub Instagram will be on there. And then tomorrow is our last day of this series. There'll be another daily email specifically about the job search, and then Molly will be doing another session at 2. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us. I love seeing your faces. I wish you congratulations on finishing your degree at Goucher, and we're excited to join you, welcome you into the Alumni Association.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
My pleasure. My pleasure. All right, y'all take care.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. All right. Thanks for joining. Bye, everybody. Thank you. All right. Hey, Antonia, how are you?